Hello! Yeah, oh, I love it when an audience talks back. That's great. Welcome everybody to the Rose O'Neal Literary House. I'm Dr. James Hall. I'm the director of the Rose O'Neal Literary House. And just a few thank yous first to Roy Kesey and Amber Talianisich, the associate and assistant directors of the Lit House. This stuff would never happen without them. So a round of applause for those folks. And also to our catering service. I hope you are all enjoying that, but a round of applause for them too. Thank you for them. They always do a great job. All right, so it's my pleasure to introduce Mike Sosulski. Here for the, well, this is not the first time you've been to the Lit House, but the first time you've given a talk at the Lit House. In fact, actually, I think you've been to the Lit House more than the past 5 presidents combined, actually. So, yeah, it's a cool space. All right. When they learn to see the strange in what was thought to be familiar, Michael J. Sosulski writes, students can become adept negotiators of their cultural surroundings. I'm sure Mike would want me to point out that I'm quoting from his article, From Broadway to Berlin, Transformative Learning Through German Hip-Hop, which was published in the journal Teaching German back in 2013. I won't quote more from that article so as not to spoil the delight we'll experience here today, but I do want to highlight that for Mike Sosulski, making the ordinary extraordinary, which poets, by the way, call their day job, is at the center of transformational learning. This kind of poetry is one quality in Mike's work as a scholar that also translates to his work as a leader. Mike's scholarly interests include national movements and their expression in German culture, the history of German theater and film, German hip-hop, and second language pedagogy. He has authored numerous articles as well as a book, Theater and Nation in 18th-Century Germany, which appeared with Ashgate Press in 2007. Mike earned his BS in German from Georgetown University in 1987 and went on to receive an MA followed by a PhD in Germanic Studies from the University of Chicago in 1999. Prior to beginning graduate school in German literature, he spent a gap year studying saxophone performance at the Berklee College of Music in Boston. Mike Sosulski is the 31st president of Washington College, having taken office on September 1st, 2021. Before coming to WC, he served as provost at Wofford College in South Carolina, where he was also a full professor of German. During his tenure at Wofford, Dr. Sosulski was instrumental in the redesign and reconstruction of a range of vibrant academic spaces. Prior to that, he worked at Kalamazoo College, serving first as an assistant professor of German and eventually earning the roles of associate professor, department chair in German studies, and associate provost. In his first year as Washington College's president, he has pushed forward with a $20 million investment in campus renovations, secured a new dining services partner for the campus, created a new senior leadership post for Dr. Alicia Knight. In the back there, we can have a round of applause for Dr. Knight. And Dr. Knight's new title is Associate Provost of Diversity and Inclusion. Mike has also approved the addition of men's and women's golf as a new sport and rebuilt a cabinet to move the college into the next decade and beyond. A native of West Chicago, Sosulski grew up a passionate Cubs fan and still roots for his home team to this day. He is married to Dr. Corey Crane, PhD, Associate Professor of German at the University of Alabama. They have 2 adult sons and a very Instagrammable and popular dog, Buster. One of the things that makes me excited about the future of Washington College, Sosulski told the Chestertown Spy, is my conviction that the liberal arts are the right way to prepare students for the world. We're glad to have Mike here as president. We're glad that he's here today to give a talk. And so please give a rousing Washington College welcome to Mike Sosulski.
Wow. Can you hear me in the back? Great, thank you. Let's see if I can get this mounted without turning it off. Well, James, thank you for that lovely introduction. Far too generous, too kind. And I also want to thank our other wonderful colleagues at the Lit House, Amber and Roy, for their hospitality and their support and their wonderful planning for events like this. Gosh, what a treat. What an amazing treat to be here with a full house. And I hope it's okay with you if this is all in German. That way, I can just tell you right now, it's going to be awesome. No, seriously, some of it's in German, and I tried my best to kind of translate for you so that you've got a sense of what we're going to be talking about, looking at, analyzing a little bit together. But I was talking to my wonderful spouse, Corey, last week, and she said, what are you going to do for your talk at the Lit House? I mean, it's such an honor to be able to do that. Look at all the people who are on the wall. I mean, Allen Ginsberg spoke here. Maya Angelou spoke here. So many wonderful people have been here. A little intimidating, to be honest with you. Just a little bit. She said, so what are you going to talk about? And I said to her, well, I'm going to talk about, I think I'll talk about Jay-Z and the notion of transculturation and German hip-hop. And she said, why would you do that? And I said, because it's the best way to get rapt attention. Thank you. Thank you for the shot. Good night, everybody. Oh, boy. Okay, she said don't do that. All right. So one of the things that I want to do, and I promise you, this was not falsely advertised, but I do want to spend a little bit of time up front in this presentation telling you a little bit about my approach as a teacher, because this is where this interest all began. I served for over 20 years as a faculty member in foreign language and culture, and Germans in particular. And one of the things that is so inspiring about that work is when you're able to devise cool strategies and methods that will help students to really grow and really transform their worldviews and their perspectives, right? So it's not just about, and Dr. Graveling will tell you this, it's not just about learning your adjective endings, although that's important. And it's not just about getting the vocabulary and the syntax right. It's also about understanding different ways of seeing and interpreting the world around us. That's what motivates me to be a foreign language instructor. And it's so exciting when you take people across that threshold. Often it happens during study abroad. But it can happen in little ways too, where you experience some, what I would call cultural dissonance, right? Something just doesn't seem right to you. Something rubs you the wrong way. Something is upsetting even to you. And it makes you think, why is that? What happened there? What was that transaction all about? What was that encounter all about? That's the kind of thing that really has motivated me to be so dedicated to that part of my career. And we can talk another time about how you wind up being so enamored of that kind of work and turn up being a president of a college. I think it's all connected, but we won't talk a lot about that tonight. But what I do want to tell you a little bit about up front is the paradigm that I have always used to think about that type of teaching and learning, and that kind of mission that I've had in my own foreign language instruction. And the paradigm that I adopted and found very inspiring was called transformative learning. And transformative learning, you hear the word transformative all the time. It has many different meanings. So let me just take a minute to kind of define it for you in this particular context. Transformative learning is a type of learning activity that over time we expect will result in perspective change or transformation. So in other words, the learner comes to expand their frame of reference about things. It comes to see the world in different ways, and hopefully more generous and capacious ways. It's not something that I thought of, not at all. Jack Mesereau is the original theorist from Columbia University, and it's really sort of started with his work, but been taken up by many other people. And what Mesereau will tell you is that transformative learning is really about changing your frame of reference. In other words, what is the interpretive framework that helps you understand your experiences in the world? Just a really mundane example. If you go into a shop in Germany, there are still places in Germany where they will not feel too great about it if you hand them any cash directly. And if they give you change after you've purchased your bread or milk or whatever it is, they're going to lay it on the counter rather than putting it in your hand. Small thing, right? But it has a lot of meaning in its cultural context. And so expanding my frame of reference to not think that was weird or silly, but really try to interrogate it and understand why that was happening and what that meant for those folks. What it did was it made me question my assumptions. Like, what are the assumptions that I have about what a transaction in a bakery should be like and how people should talk to each other, right? This is the kind of stuff that transformative learning tries to get at. And when we do this work, we create learning opportunities for students, activities, assignments that help to begin to process what that transformation can look like. The goal of transformative learning is what Mezirow will say is the self-transformed self. Through your own effort and learning, you have expanded your frame of reference so that the range of possibilities for what seems normal, acceptable, or maybe not normal, not acceptable, is a larger one, a more capacious one. A really important person who contributed to transformative learning theory is a guy named Richard Kiley at Cornell University. And Kiley really came up with his theory after years of taking students to South and Central America on study abroad trips, mostly service learning oriented trips. And what Kiley noticed was that students' assumptions and their worldviews were really profoundly challenged when they were confronted with life experiences of people that were very different than their own. And in his case, for example, they were doing service learning projects in areas of great poverty. And so he found students finding these experiences of living and working with people who have had the tragedy of experiencing such great poverty to cause dissonance. And when he talks about dissonance, he breaks it into two categories. He talks about low intensity dissonance and high intensity dissonance. So something happens, like the bakery exchange that I just talked about. That's low intensity, right? That makes me go, wow, it's weird. Wonder what happened there. And it's low intensity, and it doesn't really do much to transform my perspective necessarily, unless I really go out of my way to try to process it. But most of the time, if you have an experience of low intensity dissonance in a foreign culture, you're probably just going to adapt to it, or you might find a way to just incorporate it into your kind of pre-existing perspectives or worldview. And so it doesn't have that powerful ability to kind of transform the way you see things. Now, high-intensity dissonance, that's where Kiley sees the opportunity for growth to happen, because sometimes it'll cause a really powerful emotion or confusion. It can lead to you re-examining existing knowledge, things that you assumed were normal or true. You may have to reevaluate that stuff because of the experience that you had. And it creates permanent markers and frames of reference for people, and it, as he puts it, leads students to re-examine their existing knowledge and assumptions regarding the causes and solutions to ambiguous and ill-structured problems, such as extreme forms of persistent poverty. So the kind of stuff that rocks your world, right? I mean, it basically comes down to that. So Kiley contributed to this theory, along with Mezirow, and then some wonderful colleagues that I've done some work with, Kieran Cunningham and Bob Grossman and Karen Anderson, all worked on a transformative method of teaching. Essentially, they came up with what they call the transformation triangle. And their theory was this: if you equip students with a set of really important salient theories and concepts, so it might be a concept about poverty or structural racism, for example, right? And you give them the theoretical underpinning, and then you ask them to reflect on their assumptions about these matters, and then triangulate that ultimately with some experience, like Kiley's students got in the field doing doing service learning work, then that's when you've set the table, you have the preconditions for a transformative moment to take place. That's the theory. And so in working with them, I thought, what is the application of this for the classroom, particularly for the German classroom? You know, when you think about things that rock your world, really make you question all the assumptions that you brought in, doesn't often happen in a classroom, right? I mean, it could happen in a classroom setting, but more often than not, in my experience anyway, it's going to happen outside the classroom. It'll be an experience interacting with people or in a situation that disorients the heck out of you. And so what good is the classroom then? I mean, if we can't really give people these transformative moments necessarily in a classroom, then what do we do there? Well, the thought that I had, and Kieran and Bob agreed, is that what we can do is we can begin to set the table for people to process those disorienting dilemmas when they do come. And so practice with reflection on your assumptions, practice understanding experience, and also, most importantly, practice confronting stuff that just doesn't seem right? Things that fly in the face of what feels normal to you or what you've come to understand as normal. And so lots of practice with that. The hope is that, you know, if we were to build that into, say, a German language curriculum, which is what I did at my last institution where I was full-time teaching, you build that in, then ideally, when students go to study abroad or when they travel abroad or whenever they have a culturally dissonant experience, they got the equipment to process that in a way to maximize that, the salutary effect of having your perspective grow. So that's the idea there. So when I designed this unit, and this all grew out of a learning unit that I put together for intermediate German students. When I designed it, I thought, what's some really cool content that we can work with? A rich textual environment and also a visual environment, which I also would call textual in its own way. Something contemporary, something that people would find interesting, motivating, but also disorienting, right? Something that might knock you off center just a little bit as you processed it. And I thought, well, music videos are kind of cool. Everybody's seen music videos, right? Even now. Never seen one?
I make them.
You make them. So okay, all right. I need to hear your feedback after this here.
Okay, I definitely will.
All right, I want to hear your feedback. But one of the things that made me think that music videos could be a really cool vehicle to design some learning units around is that it's a genre that is musical and textual, and everybody's pretty familiar with it. We've all seen music videos. Some of them we love, some of them go viral, some of them we hate, but we still watch them anyway because it's fun to do that. And rap and hip hop, it was really interesting to me when I first got into this because it was still kind of an emerging genre in German culture. It wasn't quite as mainstream as it became here. They were much later to adopt this in any kind of broad way. And so what I wanted was something like that, you know, students would be able to come into the classroom already feeling they're familiar, they've got some assumptions about it, and then we could also begin to examine some of the other assumptions that are necessary when you're processing a cultural product, like what's your assumptions about authorship and authority in the creation of an artwork? What kind of strategies are best for reading and interpreting cultural texts? And when I talk about visual semiotics, what I mean by that specifically is in the video space, I'm thinking about acting, I'm thinking about mise en scène, or the way in which objects are placed in front of the camera for the viewer to process and consume. I'm thinking about the text itself, right? All of these things are carefully curated in a really nice music video. They're like miniature films, the ones that are really, really well done. And so I thought, let's do this. Let's put this in front of German students and see what they make of it. So, like I said before, the thing you want to do if you're working on a transformative learning context is you want to install some theories and concepts early on. You want to give people a theoretical framework to process things. And so the framework that I chose is one called Transculturation. And the context zone is an extrapolation of transculturation. But transculturation is a theory by Fernando Ortiz, a Cuban sociologist who, back in the 40s, was trying to figure out a theoretical framework to understand essentially the power dynamics of colonialism. And so he identified what he thought were 5 discernible stages of transculturation, where, and again, he's talking about the cultural space in which colonizers and the colonized interact with each other and essentially begin to share culture. And so stage 1 for him is where the colonizer attacks, as he puts it, black people and enslaves them by force. He's thinking about that particular colonial context. The second is what he would call a period of compromise. The third is a period of adjustment to that cultural situation. The fourth is then a period of self-assertion on the part of the colonized. And then the fifth is where cultural products are integrated into this hybrid cultural environment. So that's basically where he started out. And I could talk lots more about it, but that's not really what we're here to do today. Mary Louise Pratt, in 2005, takes Ortiz's kind of basic notion and extrapolates it. She writes a really important piece called Arts of the Contact Zone. And for her, the contact zone is that cultural space in which these people on different ends of the power dynamic spectrum, they intersect with each other, they interface with each other. And I'll just read this quote here because it's a pretty good one. She says, "The term contact zone refers to the social spaces where cultures meet, they clash, they grapple with each other, and it's often in context of highly asymmetrical relations of power," which makes perfect sense if you're talking about a colonial context. She's thinking in particular, like Ortiz was, about slavery and their aftermaths. And so this is, in my mind, a really powerful cultural construct that can help us understand what's going on in some of this hip-hop video stuff that we're about to look at. So, is it okay if I show you 4 videos? All right. You're probably here for that. You're like, show the video. Stop talking about it. Weird. It's not what was advertised. All right. Please raise your hand if you have seen the musical Annie. Wow, that's pretty good. Okay, wow. So I thought I was going to have to spend a lot of time explaining it. Okay, then just really quick. Annie is a musical that was based on a comic strip character called Little Orphan Annie. And this is a comic strip that started in the Depression era, so the 20s and 30s in the United States. Annie's obviously an orphan because she's a little orphan Annie. But what makes her adventures so interesting to comic strip readers and later people who watched this movie, which was made by Disney in 1982, what made it so interesting is that she skyrockets to fame and fortune. She gets adopted by a wealthy person. Anybody remember the name of the person who adopts little orphan Annie?
Daddy Warbucks.
Nice. All right. See, this is great. All right. Daddy Warbucks comes along and saves the day. So I'm not going to play this whole thing for you because it sounds like a lot of you are familiar with it, but I do want to give you just a little taste. And if you have brought rotten fruit or anything like that with you, please don't throw it at me until later. We are not on the screen. I know. I wonder what happened. Bear with us for a small technical adjustment. Do you recognize that song?
Yeah.
Already? It happened when I was switching from Mike, will I need to do anything again when I switch back to the PowerPoint?
It should stay there.
Is Mike still there? I can't control it. It's on the screen, but I can't start it. Oh, you just control from here like that?
It's a hard knock life for us. It's a hard knock life for us. Century and queen, century, century says queen, and queen. It's a hard knock life. Gotta go to sleep. So it's a hard knock road. We home on planets. Instead of full empty bellies. Instead of full, it's a hard knock life. Don't it feel like the wind is always howling? Don't it seem like there's never any light? Once a day, don't you want to throw the towel in? It's easier than putting up a fight. No one fell when it rains at night and creepy. No one cares if you grow or if you shrink. No one tries when your eyes are red and weepy. Gonna find you and things are gonna sing. Empty belly life, rotten smelly life, full of sorrow life, no tomorrow life. Santa Claus we never see. Santa Claus, what's that? Who's he? No one cares for you on stage. When you're in an hard bondage, it's a hard knock life.
Okay, more mayhem ensues. And you're welcome, by the way. You will not stop hearing that for the next 48 hours. This is ridiculously hypnotic sound. Just think about me. I had to listen to this for several days while I got ready for this. Okay, I'm gonna go see if I can figure out how to go back to my presentation here. There we are. Okay. There we go. Good. Okay. So, a couple of things I just want to note about that. So this is a classic Broadway musical, right? I mean, in every way. Think about the music style, but also it's a filmed Broadway musical, and so you've got the dance routines, you've got the stylized acting, all of that stuff, right? I mean, this is anything but realistic acting. This is a dream world, a fantasy place, where the characters are kind of whirling and swirling through their lives, making lots of fun happen in an orphanage, which they're also telling you is pretty miserable at the same time. So, but it's very staged, it's very theatrical in its presentation. And again, I want to talk a little bit about Pratt here. Let's go back to Pratt's theory. She says, artists in the contact zone, they construct their text by appropriating and adapting pieces of the representational repertoire of the dominant culture. They don't simply imitate the stuff. They don't just reproduce it. They select pieces of it, and they adapt it along with their own lines to express their own interests and aspirations. So they're recrafting what they find in the dominant culture and sending it back as a message, essentially. And so Annie was probably the biggest musical event of my childhood growing up. I remember going to a Broadway-style theater in Chicago to see it with my family, and it was like the greatest thing that had ever happened to anyone. It was such a phenomenon, and the soundtrack, everyone had it memorized. So it's in the water, it's in the air, right? But what's interesting is that not everyone experiences it quite the same way. And so in 1998, Jay-Z, you're seeing a really young, handsome picture of him here. Jay-Z put out a CD. Remember what those things? Those are like little plastic discs. So he put out a CD and it was called Hard Knock Life, which was pretty interesting. This is exactly, let's see, this is, so 82, it's about 16 years after Annie was filmed by Disney, but had been a sensation on Broadway for a good decade or more before that. So, like I say, it's in the water. And what he does with it, again, when I look at it, I think about Mary Louise Pratt's concept of the contact zone, and what happens there when people who are find themselves subjugated in a dominant culture, what they do with the cultural products that they find all around them. So let's take a look at this one. How many of you know this? Have you seen it? Have you seen his video? Are you familiar with it? All right. Let's see if I can make this happen here. Just gonna find my. Trying to see where my cursor's at. Come on, cursor.
Trevor clicked it.
We may need Kavina to come back and just stay with us. I know. Let's get out of there. Any idea where the cursor is? So I can start this next week.
Excuse me, sorry. I'm just gonna read your video.
Oh wait, there you go. You got it. Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right. So this is Jay-Z's response to the song that we just heard. And you've got the lyrics.
Take the bass line out. Here we go. Bam. Let it bump though. From standing on the corners bopping, to dropping some of the hottest cars New Yorkers ever seen. For dropping some of the hottest verses rappers ever heard. From the dope spot with the smoke block, thinking the murder scene. You know me well from nightmares of a lonely cell. My only hell was since when y'all niggas told me to fail. Fuck nah, we all my niggas with the rubber grips or shots. And if you with me, mama, remember your tips and whatnot. I'm from the school of the hard knocks. We must not let outsiders violate our blocks. And my block, let's pick up the world and split it 50-50. Let's take the dough and stay real jiggy. Let's hit the Chris and get pissy. Flow infinitely like the memory of my nigga Biggie. Baby, you know it's hell when I come through. The life and times of Sean Carter, nigga, volume 2. Y'all niggas be ready. Drove out, all my niggas locked down in the 10x4, patrolling the house. We live in hard knocks. We don't take over, we ball blocks. Burn it down and you can have it back, daddy. I'd rather that. I float for chicks wishing they ain't have to strip to pay tuition. I see your vision, mama. I put my money on the long shots. All my ballers that's born to clock. No mama be on top, whether I perform or not. I went from lukewarm to hot. Sleeping on futons and cots, the king size. Green machines, the green pies, the same pies. Let the thing between my eyes analyze life ills. Then I put it down tight grill. I'm tight grill with the phony rappers. Y'all might feel we homies. I'm like still, y'all don't know me. Shit, I'm tight grill. When my situation ain't improving, I'm trying to murder everything moving. Feel me? stay on my toes. Got a lot of beef, so logically, I pray on my foes. Hustler's still inside of me. As far as progress, you be hard pressed. You'll find another rapper hot as me. I gave you prophecy on my first joint, and y'all all laid out. Didn't really appreciate it till the second one came out. So I stretched the game out, extra name out, put Jigger on top, and drop albums non-stop for you, nigga.
Sorry about that. That's a little bit of a jarring way to end this here. But I want to stop it right here on this frame, because I think the little girl is one of the most fascinating elements of this video, which, by the way, I think is absolutely masterful in about 25 different ways. We could spend a whole night talking about it, I think. But one of the things that's really interesting to me when I watch this is who gets to talk about the hard knock life in Jay-Z's retelling of that story, right? Whose mouth does that come out of? And it's a complicated answer because we see a couple of female characters telling us about the hard knock life when the superimposition of the Broadway lyric comes in, right? So the first one, you remember the first one? The first one was someone who, I don't know, I like to imagine that might be his girlfriend, but it's an adult woman, and he gives her a hug, he gives her a kiss, and then immediately she takes up that refrain. But interestingly, it's not her voice, is it? It's not her voice. The dominant cultural voice is superimposed over her as she sings that song, which sends a really complicated message, I think, about what the hard knock life actually is, and who gets to define what that actually is in this context. We hear Jay-Z himself during his rap talk a lot about what he feels like the hard knocks are that he's experienced in his own growing up and coming into his own as a performer. And that's his own authentic voice rapping that. But then we have the second female character who comes in, the little girl. And did you notice? I know it's a lot to take on. I mean, normally I would go back and replay a lot of this, but we don't really have time to do a ton. But did you notice her acting style? Is it like everything else in this video? Not at all, right? She's adopting not just the language of Little Orphan Annie, but her gestural repertoire as well. So she's got this sort of Broadway kind of style of acting. It's really fascinating the way Jay-Z mixes these kind of visual and performative languages. And we've got a blue screen, which is pretty cool. Let me see if I... So anyway, I could talk a lot about that, but is that making sense? Okay. Good. So what does that have to do with German literature, Mike? German language and culture. Yeah, I know. It's an example. I use this as an example of familiar popular culture that would demonstrate the principle of transculturation, right? Sort of sampling from the dominant culture, recrafting, reshaping it, feeding it back to that dominant culture in a way that sends a really powerful message about authorship, authority, language, space, everything. So now, I'm going to go back to the other thing that I was doing, which is showing you a PowerPoint. Let's see if we can get there. Good. PowerPoint. There we go. All right. So let's talk about the city of Berlin as a contact zone. Because Jay-Z's success in giving voice to these kind of difficult questions about what's the hard knock life and how do we fit our perspective into that of a dominant culture, that didn't go lost on the rest of the world. And certainly early practitioners of rap and hip hop in Germany, they saw it. They digested it. Berlin, by the way, is a really fascinating place as a world city right now. it became ground zero for hip hop culture in Germany in the early 90s. And one of the first groups I want to show you something from is one of the very earliest groups called Advanced Chemistry. And Advanced Chemistry was a group that, yes, that was their name in English, but they were a German rap group, and they were a very multicultural group. Those of you who were paying attention to cultural discourses in the 90s might remember the multiculturalism debates that really dominated certainly Central Europe, what it meant to be a multicultural Europe. What does it mean to be a national entity when there are people from many different ethnic and racial origins in your nation? And so in the German context, the question of what the role of minorities were in the newly emerging and reunited Germany was a very, very hot topic. Germany reunited after the Cold War ended in 1989, and over the next 3 to 5 years, the two Germanys became one again, and then it became a question of who are we in this redrawn European landscape, and who belongs, by the way, as well. So, Advanced Chemistry, like I mentioned, they're one of the earliest German hip-hop groups. They were founded by people from all sorts of different places. They are all German citizens, but not originally born in Germany or not from Germany. Right? So they were what the Germans would call Neue Bundesbürger. They're new German citizens. And they were very influenced by the rap that they heard and the hip-hop that they heard in the United States. Particularly socially conscious rap and what was called the native tongues movement. Well, actually, I'm going to show you this video. Again, we won't look at the whole thing, but it's pretty old school, if that says anything to you. But pay attention, when you look at it, pay attention to the filmmaking style that they use here, and also, obviously, the language is very important. Thanks for bearing with me in my technological challenges here. You see any person?
Should I get Mike again? Here he is. Come on, Mike. Might as well.
You're my
Round of
first.
applause for Mike.
You're my first guest.
It's all done here.
Oh, there we go. Got it. Let's get that one. Outstanding. Thanks for your patience while we figure this stuff out. All right. Here's Advanced Chemistry's first big hit, which, as you can see from your handout, is titled "Foreign in My Own Country."
Ich habe einen grünen Pass mit der goldenen Nase drauf. Siehst du nicht, dass ich mir oft die Haare rauf? Jetzt mal ohne Spaß, er gab zuhauf, obwohl ich langsam Auto fahre und niemals sauf. All das Gerede von europäischem Zusammenschluss, war ich Touriste mit dem Zug oder einem Bus. Frag mich nicht, warum ich der Einzige bin, der sich ausweisen muss, Identität beweisen muss. Ist es so ungewöhnlich, wenn ein Afrodeutscher seine Sprache spricht und nicht so glatt ist im Gesicht? Das Problem sind die Ideen im System. Ein echter Deutscher muss so richtig deutsch aussehen. Blaue Augen, blondes Haar, keine Gefahr. Gab's da nicht eine Zeit, wo schon mal so war?
Gehst du mal später zurück in deine Heimat?
Wohin? Nach Heidelberg, wo ich ein Heim hab?
Nein, du weißt, was ich meine.
Komm, lass es sein. Ich kenne diese Fragen seit Kind klein. Bin in diesem Land vor 2 Jahrzehnten geboren. Doch frage ich mich manchmal, was hab ich hier verloren? Ignorantes Geschwätz, ohne End. Dumme Sprüche, die man bereits alle kennt. Oder kommt es echt nicht? Doch ein Kommentar über meinen Namen, was ist daran so sonderbar? Du bist Deutscher, kommerziell entscheidend. Du bist mir so weit, hier ist mein Ausweis. Gestatten Sie, mein Name ist Frederik Hahn. Ich wurde nie geboren, wahrscheinlich sieht man es mir nicht an. Ich bin kein Ausländer aus wie der Touristen-Immigrant, sondern deutscher Staatsbürger, komme zufällig aus diesem Land. Wo ist das Problem? Jeder soll gehen, wohin er macht. Im Skifahren in die Schweiz, als Tourist nach Prag, zum Studieren nach Wien, als Au pair nach Paris. Den anderen wollen ihr Land gar nicht verlassen, doch sie müssen fliehen.
Okay, that's just to give you a good taste of what that's like. So again, 1992, The video making style was very typical of that era, right? Sort of the handheld moving camera. People wanted to get right up in the camera and really sort of bring across a powerful message as directly as they possibly could. You read the lyrics, you can see what they're rapping about here. I thought it was pretty amazing that you had a group already rapping about microaggressions at a time when I don't even think that was a term yet, like that at least we had conceptualized to use. So, but this is really kind of the way in which this minority discourse through this art form evolved in the context of a rapidly changing Europe, where people were trying to understand what national identity actually means and can look like in a multicultural world like that. One of the things that I always point out is they use pretty simple locations, except this is interesting. This is all public space here. The props in their locations and their costumes, very simple and straightforward. The German passport's a pretty big deal. That shows up a lot. But so does the Alte Brücke in Heidelberg, so the old bridge, right, which is considered one of the landmarks in the city of the sort of ancient university city of Heidelberg. And so staking their claim on this space with this sort of multicultural group of performers, pretty powerful statement. And this, I wouldn't say went viral. This isn't the kind of thing that was happening in Germany at that time, but it was one of the most popular cultural products of that era. And I found it really interesting because about 10 years later, they got an answer to their really strong plea for multicultural understanding. They got a pretty powerful answer. I'm going to go back to this PowerPoint if I dare. Do I dare? Where's Mike? It's so hard to navigate this thing over your shoulder.
And while you're looking, yeah.
It's pretty crazy. I don't know, Mike, what am I doing now? Alright, we are back. Thanks, Mike. Don't go too far away. Okay. So again, we saw the problems of multiculturalism. We saw the question of nationalism. We saw about legitimacy, messages about that. We also saw, we heard a lot about violence, kind of emotional violence and also physical violence. And it raises those difficult questions. Going back to transculturation for a moment here, I think that we're seeing a couple of different layers here. First of all, we're seeing the appropriation or perhaps borrowing of U.S. hip-hop culture when you think about that video-making style. And we're also seeing the appropriation of those German symbols of authenticity, like the passports and all of that. So it's a pretty powerful statement. But Berlin, it's been a battleground a lot throughout history, and again in this case, Berlin became the battleground. The first wave, as I told you, of German hip-hop was really interesting because it was largely owned by minorities within Germany. And they used it often to press that kind of multicultural argument, right, for tolerance, acceptance, and belongingness. What we saw later, though, about 10 years later, when the first wave of German gangster rap came along, we saw a conscious attempt to retake that same territory back from groups with musical and ideological points to make. And I'm going to show you a little bit of that, if that's okay. So around the beginning of the 2000s, a record company was founded in Germany called Agro Berlin. And it was sort of the first and most important purveyor of so-called gangster rap. Is that a term? Does gangster rap mean anything anymore? Yeah. So, what often comes with it, and I just want to give you a little bit of warning here. What comes with it is an awful lot of misogyny exploitation of women is featured at times. Violence or allusions to violence. Lots of bad language. I mean, you've probably seen these things, but I wanted to mention it in case you would be shocked by what you are about to see and hear. The person who was the star behind Agro Berlin's in Agro Berlin's catalog of performers was a guy named Patrick Losensky, and he also went by the name Frank White, which is not coincidental. And his stage name was Flair. And what he did initially was to adopt the standard gangster rap repertoire of visual and musical tropes. You could argue, if you looked at it, certainly some of his early work, that really what he's doing is just borrowing or duplicating American gangster rap, but I'm going to argue there's a lot more to it than meets the eye initially. Much of Flair's musical and visual vocabulary does seem to be reminiscent of what we saw in the United States. But I'm going to argue that what his work amounts to here is kind of a transcultural reversal. He is using the tools of gangster rap to directly answer and to counter the visual and verbal arguments made by those minority hip-hop practitioners about a decade before. And if you look at the texts closely, you'll see there are some direct answers there. But the answers are also visual and pretty troubling. I'm sorry about that one. So I mean, his intention is to be very in your face and provocative, and he manages to do that. One of the things that Flair focuses on are things like Aryan strength and racial purity. If you look at his lyrics, you can see him talking a lot about blue eyes and white skin and muscularity. He's very interested in what we might today call a toxic masculine kind of presence. For him, Germany is for the Germans, and he gets to define who the Germans are. And he's perfectly okay with violence as a tool for ethnic cleansing. It's a pretty awful discourse. So now I will struggle once again. Maybe I won't. Maybe this is going to work great. Let me see if I can get this to you.
I think I saw it. For a second.
Was it there for a second?
It was. It's mirroring, so.
Mike, what is your magic touch?
I think so your pointer's always going to end up here. So what we do is that we just go to the edge here and then just keep moving it.
Oh, I'm with you. Okay, thank you.
It's a hidden mouse.
Gotcha. Okay, good. Alright, let me see if I can. It's awfully hard to see what's going on here. It should be the last one, actually. Yep, that's it. Cool. Thank you. Alright. So I promise you, this is the last one I'll put you through. This is Flair's one of his biggest hit songs and videos, and it's called "Check Mich Aus" or "Check Me Out." I really can't use a computer. I've done it before.
It's really hard to learn.
Schöne Werte, Kreuzwerte, Wedding, check, Neukölln, check, Tempelhof, check, 45, check, Süd-Berlin, Moskowin, baby, check, altes Kreuz, check, blaue Augen, check, auf der Street, check, baby, es ist crazy, check, baby, check mich aus, du weißt Bescheid, altes Kreuz, check, blaue Augen, check, auf der Street, check, baby, es ist crazy, check, baby, check mich aus, du weißt Bescheid. Frank's Bang, der Mädel auf dem Rücksitz, ich komm ans Set. also bück dich. Ich biet mir Mut an, nimm keine Rücksicht. Cash, Fame und Nutten, Mann, ich bin glücklich. Ich zieh Bilanz, ich bin seit 8 Jahren Rapper. Seit 8 Jahren Rapper gibt es 8 Hard und Rapper. Der Rest ist das schon, ich steh nicht für Deutschrap. Junge, ich bin cooler, keiner meiner Freunde Deutschrap. Mein Vater ist Straße, das sei meine Mutter. Dass ich schreib, was ich schreib, ist doch eigentlich kein Wunder. Gib den Beat, Job, Gerät und ich rap, bis ich sterbe. Die Nacht ist jung, siehst du den Mond und die Sterne. Rapper machen Techno, Rapper machen Ross, Rapper machen Scheiße, Rapper haben sich laut, Rapper werden schwul, Beine über Kreuz. Was ist los mit euch? Weites Kreuze, blaue Augen, auf der Street Rap. Baby, es ist Grund. Baby, check mich aus. Du weißt Bescheid. Weites Kreuze, blaue Augen, auf der Street Rap. Baby, es ist Grund. Baby, check mich aus. Du weißt Bescheid. Meine Freundin nennt mich Frank, meine Freundin nennt mich Lizzie. Ich sitz im Siebener und kipp den Whisky. Du hängst auf MySpace, ich bin busy. Deine Freundin lutscht meinen Schwanz und du kannst sie. Rapper sind wie Nutten, Rapper labern viel. Rapper hängen auf Koks, Rapper auf Hartz IV. Rapper sehen wie Emos aus, Rapper wollen Knast. Rapper kaum Penis, Rapper sind nicht krass. Du willst ein Interview, kein Kommentar. Weil ich schlappe gut im Bett, kein Kommentar. Die ganzen anderen Rapper kommen mit mir nicht klar. Denn ich komm von der Street und sie nicht aus dem Arsch. In diesem Spiel gibt's nur Neid, doch ich scheiß drauf. Ich sehe jeden Tag nur Gewalt und ich schreib's auf. So ist das Leben, so ist es. Straight fick das Business, du weißt Bescheid. Weites Kreuze, blaue Augen, auf der Street Rap. Baby, es ist great. Baby, check mich aus. Du weißt Bescheid. Weites Kreuze, blaue Augen, auf der Street Rap. Baby, es ist great. Baby, check mich aus. Du weißt Bescheid. Schöneberg, Kreuzberg, Wedding, Neukölln, Tempelhof, 45, Süd-Berlin, Moskau, Baby.
Okay. So in lots of ways, kind of a standard product of what you would see as gangster rap, right? I mean, just a lot of the sort of visual tropes and references to violence and terrible exploitation of other genders and things like that. But there's actually quite a lot more going on in there, and it goes by very quickly. You know, it'd be, if we had more time, we could spend a little shot analysis looking at what's going on here. But the last couple of scenes, you see a lot of sort of hand gestures and aggression between groups going back and forth. What you're seeing there is, you know, his depiction of his people, his gang, facing off with ethnic minorities in Berlin. And you can see from the lyrics, he's checking off neighborhoods in Berlin like he's colonized them, right? Like he's recolonized them, he's taken them back. And that's really a big part of his cultural plan here with this kind of video production is to rhetorically reclaim territory that minorities had claimed to be theirs as well. And there's an awful lot we can talk about there, but I know we are running short on time, and I don't want to keep everybody super long. Let me just bring us back to our presentation here. Oops. So one thing to note, within a couple of months of this video being released, it already had over 500,000 views, and it's way past that now. Typical of his style in many respects. When you look at this, the geography is such a key element of it, right? We just talked about the way in which he checks off all kinds of neighborhoods in Berlin. But the end sequence, to me, is one of the things that's really most striking. There's a counter-shot sequence at the very end there where Turks and Germans play out this physical and symbolic aggression against each other, which is, of course, what he wants. He wants to provoke this kind of interaction. And this takes place in a Turkish tea house. And it ends, of course, with his gesture of decapitation. So he's not being altogether too subtle here, unfortunately. And these are stories that we have heard and seen before. So what I see Flair doing here when we think about the transculturation that we're witnessing here is he's reappropriating the hip-hop discourse that he saw sort of taken into the hands of people like advanced chemistry and turned to purposes that didn't feel right to him. So he turns it back against them. He consciously reverses the aesthetic moves of minority German hip-hop. So if you look at advanced chemistry, that's all daytime shots, right? This substitutes night for day. Rather than complaining about the violence that minority folks suffered in Berlin, he readily adopts that violence and very clearly rejects flatly this plea for acceptance. So just to take it home, transculturation and transformational learning are really about examining assumptions that you might have about apparently easily legible cultural products. And I think we showed that there's more to Jay-Z's video than meets the eye initially. Understanding that theory sets the stage for encounters with the foreign. So hopefully, I think my students affirmed this for me, that when experiencing this hip-hop, even though it looked at the surface level quite familiar, the German products, when they dug deeper, they saw lots of different things going on there, certainly politically and culturally. And hopefully, this helps people understand new experiences and be a little bit more open to them when they've spent a lot of time with strange things that appear to be familiar initially. So that, I think I will end on. I just wanted to say yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for paying attention and being here. I'm happy to do that if people have any that they want to answer.
Does anyone have a question before we break? Anyone want to ask a question? Or are we good? All right, if not, could we please give another round of applause for President and so please join us on March 7th, on Tuesday, for a poetry reading and workshop all in one by Professor Meredith Hadaway, the Sophie Kerr Writer in Residence. That's Tuesday at 5:30 in this same space with the new chairs. How do you like the new chairs? Yes, they make it a little bit bearable, huh? And thanks again to Mike Kavina for all of your efforts and help. And I hope to see you all on Tuesday. Thank you again, President Mike. Yeah. All right. Have a good night, everybody. Stay safe. Take food. Take food.
I'm gonna go